So I'm going to talk about the El Camino Francis pilgrimage that we did from Sarria to Santiago de Compostela back in October of 2022. So before I start, has anybody had the opportunity to even walk a trail or do a pilgrimage? If not, maybe this will convince you that maybe this is maybe a fun thing to do. Okay. Edward, the down arrows don't work. Oh, there we go. Okay. So before I get to this slide, I want to just talk about what made us think, or me think, that I needed to put a pilgrimage on my bucket list. So I had the opportunity to spend a few days on the Appalachian Trail here in the United States, found walking very therapeutic, and sort of decided I needed to put it back, some kind of pilgrimage on my bucket list. So once I started looking at maybe where to go, Spain kind of was reoccurring. And during that time, I read books, looked at YouTubes, watched the movie called The Walk, and finally decided that I was going to commit to putting it on my bucket list. So looking into 2022, I came to the realization that I was going to turn 70. And decided that I had to do something adventurous, something big for my 70th birthday. So I decided that this is where we needed to do a pilgrimage. So I was lucky enough to get Randy to go with me. And I also got two of my sisters that have been kind of adventurous to go with me as well, Kathy and Kim. And so one of the things about a pilgrimage is usually done because you have like a personal trauma. You have, maybe you're coming back from a war, you lost a loved one, you've gone through a health issue. Your life isn't going as expected. And sometimes people just kind of break out of their lives and decide they're going to walk. And so I didn't have any of those. So I was like, okay, I have to have a reason that I'm going to do this pilgrimage. So I decided that mine's going to be gratitude. Just gratitude with the life that I have been blessed with. And of course, Randy was coming with me. So I told him, you know, you have to have a theme too. So he came up with happy wife, happy life. So once I got it on the bucket list, I took a lot of advice from other people that have done it that said, you need to train. And we're like, train. Okay, so we trained for 4 to 6 weeks, literally walking as much as we could and as long as we could, to where we were walking 8 miles a day. So going from that premise, we ended up doing this walk. And what I want to talk about is that there are sacred routes in Spain. And the Christians in the first millennium, they considered these routes very sacred, and that they offered a series of blessings and indulgence to anybody that went and started walking on these walks. So the first pilgrimage was led to the tomb of St. Peter's in Rome, and they were called wanderers, and they took the cross as their symbol. The second sacred one was led to the Holy Sepulchre of Christ in Jerusalem. Its travelers were called palmanists, and the symbol was the palm branches with which Jesus was granted when he entered that city. The third route is led to the mortal remains of the Apostle St. James. He's believed to be buried. He was buried on a place on the Liberian Peninsula, where one night a shepherd had seen a brilliant star above a field. The legend says that not only did St. James, but also Virgin Mary went there shortly after the death of Christ, carrying the word of the evangelist and tried to get people to convert. This site came to be known as Compostela, the land of the stars, and then a city has arisen that drew travelers from every part of the Christian world. Those travelers were called pilgrims, and the symbol was the scallop shell. So the third route is the most common route, and this is existed since the medieval times and stretches 490 miles or 750 kilometers from a city in France by the Pyrenees Mountains, and it goes to Santiago de Compostela. From this point on, I'm not going to say that de Compostela anymore, because that's quite the tongue twister for me. So I'm just going to say Santiago. So the French way is the most traveled way. And it's because once you get closer to Santiago, all the other routes actually converge and merge into one. And we all come in those routes into Santiago together. And Pope Francis extended the Jacobin Holy Year to 2022. So thanks to a French priest who walked this trail in 1123, the route followed by the pilgrims today is exactly the same medieval path that was taken by Charlemagne, Saint Francis of Assisi, Isabella of Castile, and most recently by Pope John the 23rd. So this is the symbol of our walk. It was the scallop shell. And it was absolutely amazing where the different ways that you would see this shell. It was incorporated into items and statues and buildings and landscaping, and you could not turn around and there would be a scallop shell in some fashion looking at you. So we were going to start it in Soria, and that is a municipal of the province of Lugo. And the distance between these two cities is approximately 100 kilometers or 69 miles. The distance has special meaning because if you walk that distance, you will be certified as an accomplished pilgrim and you'll get some credentials. And if you bike it, which we saw people on bikes, they needed to go 200 kilometers. So here we are in day one of our trip, our walk, and we arrived at our hotel at 3 a.m. in the morning due to a flight issue, and we started walking at 8 a.m. And everybody else was gone already, and we're still there, but we started. And we actually started a little bit of mist. So we are walking a couple hours already, and Randy we've gone up like 3 or 4 hills at this point. And Randy he's on top of the hill and he turns to me and he says, "Beth, I thought you said that this was basically a level walk." And I said, "Yeah, that's what the pictures look like. And that's kind of what I read about." And he walks about 2 more steps and he said, "They lied, and so did you." So that was not the last of the hills we saw. We saw a lot more hills along the way. So here's a map of the walking route. So as you can see, we walked through a lot of different cities, villages in the Galicia area of Spain. So over the next 9 days, these are the different places that we walked to. So you can see some days we had kind of a small mile, 5.6 miles, but some days we were at 10.5. And these are mileages if we walked straight through. But of course, you know, we went off the beaten path here and there. And so we ended up actually we went 82 miles in total. So we walked about 9 miles a day. We saw a lot of people on the trail, obviously. It was towards the end of the season, but we still saw a fair number of people. And one of the common greetings was Bien Camino, which means to other pilgrims meant good path, good way. And so we just walked and walked and walked, and we walked through really cool little villages and hamlets. We walked through dense forests. We walked along a lot of high stone walls that were very old. And we also walked in the mist in a lot of the mornings. You can see down in the lower corner, down on the left side, there's a picture of us actually with the sun coming up, and we're walking and the mist is all around us, and it would burn off fairly, fairly soon. Luckily, our luggage, our lodging, and our dinners were already planned for the evening. And our only requirement was that we completed our walk before dinner. So there were points like a scavenger hunt every day because we needed to find 2 passport stamps every day. And this is to verify when you go to get credentialed that you actually completed the walk. So you could find these stamps at bakeries, churches, shops, hotels, coffee shops, or eateries. So you actually were looking for these stamps. In some of the smaller hamlets, it was kind of tricky to find them, but you needed to document that you actually went and hit these major little stops. So these are Oreos, and what they are basically are granaries. And they're very widespread throughout this rural Galicia. Their function is to store grains and food products for winter, and you can see they're always elevated. I loved them. I must have 50 pictures of all these different structures. I just thought they were just so charming. And now when we got a little further into this, we realized that now they have put his very big, Spain has made them historical structures. So there's very strict regulations on what you can do with these now, but they're very common in rural Spain. And here shows the longest one, and it's out in a very small hamlet. It was built between 1760 and 1783 in 2 pieces. It was 115 feet long, and I just thought it was spectacular. So along the way, obviously, we had to be able to figure out which way to keep walking. And so the picture up on the far left side with the yellow shell on the sign and the blue background, that was the most common marker we saw. That would also have the kilometers of what kilometer you were walking on that path. The other ones were just ones that were pretty decently easy to follow, but there were some days that we had a hard time finding our way. And especially if we started talking to other pilgrims that we met, sometimes you get so engrossed with that, you wouldn't be looking for these markers. And then all of a sudden we'd be like, oh, I haven't seen a marker in a long time. And we have to backtrack and try to find the markers. So they weren't always apparent. And sometimes, as you can see, they were in the middle of some graffiti there. The thing is that when you're walking on a path like this, you realize that there is some toll to your body. There's some physical discomforts that you're going to encounter. So you do need a motivation to continue to walk. So each village, there was a statue, a central square, or a church, something to inspire us to keep walking. And some of them were absolutely amazing with their detail. And some were so simple that they were actually just very beautiful. So there's a lot of motivation to continue moving another step, and continue to get to where you need to go. The churches along the way all amazed us, and usually they had a rope to the bell tower to ring the bell. And of course, the bigger the village, the bigger the church played a role in that village. And we could listen as we were walking. We could hear the ringing of the bells, and the sound would come back and bounce off of the hills in the region, and it was just spectacular. Obviously, we did not do any bell ringing because we had no idea what that meant to what time they were doing it. So we behaved ourselves on that, but it was tempting. All of us sisters all grew up on a farm, so we loved the rural life, walking through the rural farming areas. And we got to see, you know, John Deere tractors and old ox carts being used. We got to see cows and pigs and sheep and geese and chickens and all those things that you see out on a farm. And we had this experience with this local lady who was taking her herd to the pasture, and she was walking also with her dog, and the sheep jumped over a stone wall, but they were in the wrong pasture. And we just kind of stood and watched, and she didn't utter a word, she didn't whistle, she didn't do anything, but all of a sudden the sheep all turned around in a group, went back over the stone fence, and just kind of went down this pathway that was between all the stone fences and disappeared down through the valley. And so that was a wonderful experience. We really enjoyed that whole experience. So the lodging along the way extended from quaint hospital or hotel type rooms to modern hotels to very rural B&Bs, which was always a delight for us by the end of the day, because we didn't know where we were going to stay that night. But we knew at least our luggage was going to be there, and we were going to have a delicious dinner, which usually included a lot of wine. So that really did help. And this picture is just some of the Spanish food that we enjoyed. Along the trail, there were a lot of opportunities where people helped the pilgrims, and they basically would have fruit and pastry and coffee and drinks. And it was just like pay what you can type of thing. And so we really did enjoy that. And then of course at our lodging, we would have a traditional, a lot of times Spanish meal with a lot more traditional food. And there was only one dinner one night that we kind of thought wasn't up to our standards. It must have been something we really didn't care for or something, but we didn't particularly like that dinner. I can't express how beautiful rural Spain is. It is very spiritual to walk on trails that thousands of people have walked before, seeing some of the same scenery that they saw. And we love to walk through the towering woods and the pines. And at times it just literally took your breath away. And I think I had tears in my eyes more than I would like to ever admit. It was just very, very, very beautiful. But around every corner, you never quite knew what you were gonna get. So that was one of kind of the fun things. You'd walk around a corner in a village, and all of a sudden you'd find a spectacular garden, or you'd this big fountain area, or the foliage and the flowers and the grapevines. You just never knew what to expect when you went around a corner. So that became quite the adventure in itself. And then we had some really unusual structures, like the one in the far left is a community clothing wash basin, which basically is their washing machine that they use as a community. The second one in there that is actually a water fountain for pilgrims as well as anybody else. It's fresh, cold, clean water. And then of course, here's another one of those granaries that I really enjoyed. So as you're walking, you start to realize and you start to question, like, how old are all these structures that you're walking across, and all these stone walls and just the beauty around you. And there were some that had signs, like the one in the second picture off the left. That was a Roman bridge that was built in the 2nd century and is still being used. And a lot of times you could tell things were very old because it was very narrow pathways. It was stone on either side of you, a lot of moss and a lot of plants, and you could just tell by it was just old, and it would lead into a village. And so it made you appreciate that you were among history, and even impressed that you knew that thousands of other people have crossed this Roman bridge, and you are doing it now. So there were plants and trees that just totally kind of confused us. And the one on the left there, we saw that all over in fields. We saw it next to houses. We saw it by farms. And I kept saying, I think it's a cabbage plant. And my sisters are like, I don't think so. But basically what it is, it's a Brussels sprout. They have taken the Brussels sprout off for human consumption. They leave the rest of the plant grow, and then they chop it down and they feed it to cattle. So those are still there. The second one is eucalyptus. And one of the things about eucalyptus is they hated it. They hate it in Spain. It's very invasive. It has very little commercial value. And it came in by a monk in the 19th century. He brought some seeds here, and it has literally invaded. And it's actually taken over some of their native forests. So you will be walking and there'll be just the greenest forest you can imagine. And here's this clump of silver, like that color there, that's silverish green. And that is eucalyptus. And they really do hate it. This is Portomarin. And this is one of the most interesting cities, I think, that we went through at the time. What it was back in 1963, they decided to build a reservoir up the river and flood the valley. The only problem was this city sat down on that river level. So what they did was, piece by piece, they took the most historical buildings inside of this village, and they actually took them piece by piece, labeled them, numbered them, took them up the mountain, and rebuilt them on top of the mountain. So they ended up taking the big chapel, the church, and there's a big staircase to go up this side of the mountain. They took that as well. And the water was so low when we were there that we could see the outlines of the old village right in the riverbed. And it included that, where the arrow is, that is a Roman-built bridge. So one of the places that we ended up taking a little side tour where they said you could just walk blah, blah, blah mile, kilometers, and you could see this Roman fort that was built in the 1st century. So we decided we had to do this. The Roman army constructed a lot of temporary and very permanent forts across Spain. And the majority of these forts were built in the interior and provided a protective spot for accommodations, storage of food, weapons, horses, administrations. And this literally had a 365-degree view of anybody coming to attack them. And so this is what is left of that 1st century Roman fort. So finally, by the 9th day, we actually are going back up a hill again into a park, and all of a sudden we see the church steeples of Santiago de Compostela. And here is a welcome sign that we had, of course, take a picture of as we came into that park on the edge of the city. So now we started to walk on sidewalks, and of course we had to stop at cafes and have some food and drink along the way, but we also lost our markers. There were no more little markers. We couldn't find them, but unfortunately there were enough pilgrims there with their backpacks on and their walking sticks. We just followed them, thinking they probably know where they're going. And they look pretty tired. A lot of those look pretty tired because a lot of them were walking the whole distance. But it took us another couple of hours before we finally walked into the central plaza, and we actually made it. And you can see the sheer joy on our faces when we finally got to the church plaza. And here is the welcoming path of that plaza. As you can see, there's some flowers. I see that we didn't get any, in the picture, we didn't see any mementos that people had laid there. As people came in, they laid down stones and all the different things they kind of collected as they were doing their walk. So that actually was all around these big pavers. Here is the Cathedral of Santiago. The official name is the Cathedral of St. James. This was our goal after all. This is the end of the pilgrim age. And this is just one side of this cathedral. It pretty much, it's huge. It takes up almost the entire city block there, as we would think of city blocks. This is a picture of where we walk through the holy door to get inside to go to mass. 2021 was a holy year, but due to COVID, most people didn't make this pilgrimage to the cathedral. And so the Pope decided that he needed to make 2022 also the holy year for Christians. So that's why it was 2 years instead of 1 year, was because of that. So this church here, the inside of the church, like I said, it was huge, both inside and out. We attended the Pilgrim High Mass at noon. There were lots of pilgrims around. We could see them by backpacks. They had walking sticks, they had hiking shoes on, and they basically sometimes slept through part of the mass. But the church basically was destroyed by the Muslims at the end of the 10th century and then totally rebuilt on the 11th century. And it's the reputed burial place of St. James the Great, one of the apostles of Jesus Christ. And it's one of the remaining churches in the world that are actually built over the tomb of an apostle. So the next thing we had to do is try to see if we could actually get our credentials. So after the officials checked out our passport to make sure we had the right amount of stamps and we had the right cities and villages and all that. They verified our names, our addresses, our nationality. We got our official Latin credentials, and this is just a picture of that I have, and ours are actually over there on the table. So the last thing we wanted to do in Santiago at this point is that we went looking for the last of the 7 medieval doors that, and the only one that's left in the old town of Santiago, which is actually surrounded by a very strong wall. And after we found that, we realized that was what we considered the end of our trip, our pilgrimage. So now Randy's going to take over, and he's going to tell you what we did after that.
So after a good night's sleep, we boarded a bus rather than choosing to walk another 3 days to Cape Finisterre. Cape Finisterre is a rock-bound peninsula on the west coast of Galicia. In Roman times, it was believed to be the end of the known world. And the walk to the end of the world from Santiago, which we chose to not do, is known to be unique, adventurous, and spiritual. Here's a view of the end of the world. I guess you can see at the point is that's all the people back then saw was just water, and so they thought that was the end of it. Also here at the end of the world is a cross, and at that cross, pilgrims either left some of their mementos, and you can see some of the ones that are laying there, but over time, they used to also burn their clothes because it was a form of closure for their pilgrimage. Here is another one of those monuments. It's like the final destination. So this is kind of marking the end of it for those pilgrims who continued from Santiago to Cape Finisterre. Another sort of view of that area. Picture on the right is Beth and her 2 sisters that are celebrating the end. It's really windy there, obviously, because it is on a peninsula. All right, so what are some of the things that best things about this journey and some final observations? Well, we're really happy that we hired a company to plan the dossier, would move our luggage, and provide us vouchers so that we had food for breakfast and dinner. We're very surprised at the large number of individuals who are walking alone. I mean, here we had a group of 4, and there were groups of 6, but a lot of single people. And more surprising was the number of young single women who were walking. And finally, we were also sort of shocked with the small number of Americans we saw walking. Now, apparently, we learned at the end is that ever since COVID, the number of Americans that are doing this pilgrimage has really dropped off substantially. What we enjoyed was the homemade sangria, the red wine, and the local glacier beer. Some of the foods, the paella, the fresh seafood, the croquettes and shrimp scampi were all awesome. And finally, we were really glad that we took the time to enjoy and view our surroundings. So many of the walkers is that they were either just walking with their head down the whole time, or they were just, beating it to get to the night so they can get a room for accommodations. Because we were fortunate we had rooms. A lot of these, it was kind of first come, first served. Well, we thought that the Camino was the most important part of this presentation, and we knew that some of you have already traveled to Barcelona, Madrid. But when we did fly into Spain, our first stop was Barcelona. We initially did all those touristy things. All four of us really loved Barcelona, and our thanks go out to Edward and Paula, who gave us some really insight about the city of Barcelona. Some interesting facts is we found it was so much cheaper to eat inside. You pay a 10% surcharge to eat out on the patio. The homemade gelato, it looked like pieces of art. We saw some of the largest yachts that we've ever seen. We've been to a lot of harbors and marinas around, and these were just monster, very, very high-end boats or high-end yachts. City metro area, 5.6 million. Average salary there is only 32,000 euro a year. It's very hard for foreigners to get jobs there because you have to have an occupation that's on the shortage list, job shortage list. They still are doing their siestas, their daily naps from 2 to 4. Most of all the businesses we found were closed between the 2 to 4. Then of course they open up and go back to work. We did find, though, talking to some of the locals, that office jobs are now foregoing the siestas because after the pandemic, they just have too much work to do. And finally, for all of us, the four of us, we all tend to eat early, probably for 6 p.m. Well, then we found, of course, dinner there is served from 7 p.m. till midnight. And only some restaurants don't even open until at least 8 o'clock. So we really weren't used to eating that late. We took a scenic boat ride in the harbor, Barcelona. The sights were beautiful. This is sort of a hazy day. It wasn't the best, but from the left, that's not on this picture, is the old Olympic site. And you sort of pan, and you see the hills in the background, and you go all the way to the right, and you see where the beaches are. It's actually a very beautiful city from the water. We also followed Edward and Paula's advice, and we stayed off the La Rambla. The market here was also very close, and we went there at least 3 times. I think we went more, but it's all very colorful, all settled so nice. You get almost anything you want, from meat, fish, desserts, and lots of chocolate. We really love these little snack cones that are on the left. It contains like different meats and some breads. And of course, lots of fresh sangria. We got all around the city, and here are just a few pics of the different areas and parks. Statues on the left, statues everywhere. There's a Arc of Triumph, which was the access the World's Fair back in 1888. And then a picture of a street or alley from the historic Gothic corridor. I mean, most of all the alleys kind of look like this. They don't have that little bridge connection, but I particularly like that because I kind of like the architecture. Probably many of you know what this is. Well, this is the Sagrada Familia. This is an exterior picture from the northwest. What you see here is a crane in the background. This is still undergoing construction, building 2 more of these peaks or spirals. Do a kind of close up of all the facade. It's unbelievable designs, intricate detailing. The one like on the right, we had a tour and they actually, this is telling a story. All these designs are actually telling a story. This work has continued since the architect passed away. And I just realized that one slide was not covered. And the building is designed, is really real thought out. The most linear parts of the cigarette is west and east. And so you have one here that's designed for the sun rising, and the colors are one thing, and then for sunset, the color of the glass is different. So it's always different. Inside, it's I don't know how you describe it. The columns that support the building, in this case, they're tree trunks, and all the supporting members support the roof line. They're branches of tree, and so these are really trees, meant to be trees. And I don't know, it's some people say it's quirky. Yes, it is, but it's something really unbelievable. Parkway, this is another a famous setting in Barcelona. This was also designed by Gaudi, the famous architect. There's a building here on the left. This is just one of many buildings that are in the park. Again, it's unique. In the background on the far left-hand side there, you can see the Sagrada, and on the right, these are mosaics. These mosaic tile that covers almost all the benches and all the sort of knee walls that are in the park. Well, after we finished Cape Finisterre, we headed to Madrid. That became our final stop in Spain. And although there are many highlights, these were just a few of ours. The Royal Palace, the tapas and wine tour at night, an eco tuk-tuk tour, and the views that we had from the sky deck from our hotel. In Madrid is the most expensive city in Spain. Vermouth drinks are very, very popular, which is sort of unusual because we never saw vermouth sold or talked about in Barcelona nor in any of the towns along the Camino Trail. Finally, its population is 6.75 million, making it the largest city in Spain. The Eco Tuk-Tuk Tour, really glad that we took this because the little tuk-tuk could go on streets and alleys that cars or trucks or other vehicles could not travel. Our guide was phenomenal. She just took us to every like nook and cranny of that city. We learned really a lot about the history of both Madrid and this Spain itself. That seems that they said their attitude is that we've been conquered by almost every country. The Romans, the Moors, the French, the Vikings, but all those countries that have captured, invaded Spain, they've all influenced the culture, the religion, and obviously the architecture. The Royal Palace, and all of its 3,000 rooms. Now, this was built by the Moors in the 9th century. It was damaged in the 18th century, and then it was rebuilt and repaired. Currently, nobody lives there. It's only used now for state events or special occasions. And while we were there, the picture on the right, there was some obviously dignitaries that were there. The guardsmen, they're all dressed up in their best clothes and they're on their horses. And of course, out in the audience and on top of the building are all security people with loaded weapons. We asked as well as other people asked, about what's going on, and they would not share us any information. But before we left, 3 limousines came out with those diplomatic flags. So obviously it was some who's who that was visiting the palace. We took that tapas and wine tour in the evening. And this is one of the 4 places that we went, and it didn't mean anything to us, but apparently this was a very well-known tavern in Madrid. We went there, they served vermouth, and this is the drink that the locals drink before dinner. And they consider it an appetizer. vermouth here is a wine that's fortified with herbs, spices, and botanicals. And then it's just left to age in barrels until it's just right. And of course, there we are. We're enjoying our glasses. The lady next to me with the funky glasses, she's a single gal traveling, and she was from Chicago, so she sort of hung around with us that evening. Hotel Rue, 27 floors of the hotel. It's considered one of the best hotels in Madrid. And fortunately, not sure how she did it, but her best sister Kathy was able to secure 2 rooms for us. What was really neat was the sky deck, the picture on the right that we had, particularly at nighttime. We had views of all the avenues that were around the hotel. We all, because we had been there, we felt some ways that Madrid had the feel of New York City or even maybe Michigan Avenue in Chicago. Fortunately, Madrid, because of its location, it kind of sits in a bowl and it has sort of desert-like environment around it, which creates that warm air mass. It traps pollution, and so it's really hazy and has some real air quality issues. We really love the plazas. One at the left, Barcelona also had many of these plazas, and they're really neat. They're especially neat at night. And at the one at the right, you see a building that's all lit up. It's kind of interesting. A lot of the buildings in downtown Madrid were lit almost like a lot of the buildings in downtown Dallas are. And of course, lots of tourists around. Well, then that kind of ends our journey. We ended our journey back home with a flight that was canceled. Next morning, we were able to get a flight that took us from Madrid to Frankfurt, Frankfurt to Newark, Newark to Dallas. Fortunately, we were able to be fully compensated, only probably because we filed it under that EU 261. Well, Beth has another bucket list checked off. And so what is our next adventure? Well, that was recently answered. We just returned from Australia and New Zealand, and Paula has us to report on that journey in November. So any questions, comments, thoughts? Let's see.
The company who organized or helped you with the organization of your walk, your hike, did you go or did you Google that? How did you find it?
I'll let Beth, come on. You can bring up here.
I actually, started looking for companies, because there are a lot of companies out there that would do it. And we settled on Santiago Ways. And you basically tell them kind of what they interview you and kind of ask you what you're looking for, kind of thing. And literally they have food, your lodging, it's a beautiful set. And it will tell you what to see in each one. And it wasn't about cost, it was about $1,000 a person for us to walk for 9 days. With lodging and food and everything, it was about $1,000. Yes. It was, so, I mean, for us to walk those over 4 hours, I'm paying about 40 minutes.
That's good.
Yeah. Drinks, I mean, I feel the staircase, no wine, and everything like that, yeah. At least, I mean, the lodging was fabulous versus what people that were doing the really long hikes, where they had to every day fight for, places to actually lodge. When we were there, like I said, we were kind of the tail end of it, because they were actually closing down like a week after most of the places that we walked through, the villages that were helping to support the pilgrims that we walked. Those people were closing about a week after we were there. So when we were October. So that they're very supportive as to what you want, and so if you want to do it with the organization. But the people that are walking the whole distance, that's what they really had to struggle to find places to stay. And a lot of them that we talked to, because we talked to, people that were making this long one. Going through the Pyrenees, the first start of that out of France is heaven.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, going through there, climbing over rocks, whatever. We met some sisters in their mid-50s, early 60s, said that it was the worst days that they ever spent.
Right.
Because there's no lodging, you can't, if you don't make it over the mountain the first day, you're up in, yeah, the lodging is really bad there. And so we're very glad we didn't do that, because we're like, oh, we're at our age, thing, that's not the thing to do. So that, for me, one of the things was that if I was gonna do this pilgrimage, I was going to be, because I was turning 70, I was going to have some preacher comforts. I was going to, I mean, I will take the bad knees, and I know I'm gonna get blisters, that type of thing. I knew this was gonna be hard on a lot of your body parts. And, you know, it was, my one sister that walks all the time, she had 7 blisters. I had 2 that I did some surgery on. Randy had 0. He had used his socks.
And good stuff.
He had the individual toe socks.
Yeah.
Way to go, not a problem.
See, I would be very interested in doing it. Now, as a solo woman, I'm gonna be 78 this summer. So I would not want, I don't want the arduous way of doing it. I want to be, just have a,
Right.
I mean, you know, a little.
You don't wanna go to the dormitory, that's a
No.
chance, yeah, the dormitories, where, yeah, those, you know, people said they picked up bed bugs. I would advise you to go to YouTube and just look at as many videos as you can on people that actually have done the trail. And actually, take their advice when they're saying, you know, a lot of them said, I didn't see anything. My head was down all the time. I just trucked along and I missed all the stuff. And we would talk to people at the end of the day and he would say, oh, did you see so-and-so? And they're like, what? We never saw it. They were so focused on getting from point A to point B, they never looked around. They just went right through villages that had beautiful things to offer you to see, or they never stopped at the top of a hill that had absolutely spectacular views of something else that in the distance. You know, and that wasn't the purpose of it, yes. So everybody's advice almost on this YouTube will say, slow down, take a look, take your time. And that's why, you know, we never had to worry about our lodging or where our dinner was coming from, because we knew that we already had that booked, and we also knew our luggage was gonna be there. And some of them, their luggage never got where they were supposed to either. So.
Did you stay mostly in private homes? The places they put you at?
Yeah, they were.
They weren't like B&Bs?
Yep, some were B&B, some were out in the country where they'd pick us up in a little village and take us like, you know, I don't know how many, 12 kilometers out or something, and we'd be at a working farm. You know, it was just all sorts of ones. And sometimes in bigger cities, we actually stayed in hotels that were actually hotels. You know, they also made sure, because one of the things was I wanted to make sure that there were we had laundry services, just because every so often we gotta, you know, we only want to take, but you barely, you don't take a lot, you take a carry-on and that's it. So I wanted, you know, make sure we were at least one bigger one where we had laundry facilities to do it. So it's all the different types of things that they ask you, and so then they plan it and then you prove it and things like that. So we were very happy with the company.
Were they an American company?
No, they're Spanish.
Spanish.
Yeah.
Did they provide a lunch for you?
A lunch for us? No. We had a big breakfast always. And then we would walk, and then as we're walking, we get to hamlets and these people would give us fruits, you know, all different sandwiches. And it was kind of, most of it was pay as you go. So, you know, some people, especially the younger ones, didn't necessarily have any money. We would throw in money, but their food was never an object. I mean, we never had to worry about them being hungry and stuff or anything like that.
So what did you carry in your backpack? I mean, they were very full. If your luggage is being, what was in there?
What was in their backpacks? Dossier, so we knew where we were going. We at least had, you know, at least that page of where we were walking, point A to point B. We had those in there. You know, we had like, you know, suntan lotion. We had rain gear, we had umbrellas, we had,
Water bottle.
water bottles, that's, you know, water's very
Snacks.
heavy. Snacks, we did have some snacks, what else? We had hats to, you know, because of the sun.
You get extra socks.
We had socks, yes,
I did.
because, yeah, because we, a lot of times to change socks due to the rain. Yeah, you change socks, yeah, we did things like that, we had a first aid kit. Because, you know, if you got really bad, you'd have to do something with your toe or your foot or something, so you'd have to do, you know, a little surgery or whatever you needed to do. Yeah, so that's basically what we had there. Probably a jacket, probably. Yeah, yes.
I grew up on a farm as well. I'm interested in the grains. How were they used in the old days? What was the purpose? I mean, did they store grain for everybody? Or how were they used?
Well, basically, every farm had them. They basically put a lot of the corn and the
It
grain.
was for their own use.
Yes,
It was not for the community.
no,
Okay.
no, most of
I'm
them,
with you now.
yeah.
I know what.
yeah. So it was
I
basically,
got confused. I thought, well, maybe that was a.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
that
like
big
a
long
little
one.
library.
Yeah.
That wasn't-
yeah, yeah.
I thought that would be a little.
Oh, my gosh, they were absolutely breathtaking, and they'd be walking and they'd be somewhere else, and I'm back there still snapping pictures and looking at these things and finding. I was, I really was, but
Those were really interesting.
yeah, they're very cool.
How many pictures did you end up taking? Thousand?
I don't know, a lot.
I think we actually, all of us, all four of us put our pictures together in a shared album, and I think it's about 700 of them. We tried not to duplicate each other, because a lot of times, you know, we were kind of taking the same pictures, or we took the same pictures, you know, or two of us, you know, if we saw something, take the same thing or whatever, so we tried not duplicating. I think we had about 700 in shared album, yeah. So my sister Kathy, she's 8 years younger than me, and the youngest sister, the shorter one, she's 15 years younger than her. So they both were probably in a little better shape and could go faster, so we just let them go. I mean, we were like, go ahead, take the thing. But there were a lot more hills.
But
than we
also,
thought.
they missed stuff along the trail.
Yeah,
too.
they
They're sitting
did.
there gabbing away and
Yeah,
talking and
yeah.
whatever. They missed a lot.
But we were amazed that there weren't more Americans, because even when we got credentialed, they said that basically they had under 100 Americans that had walked it during the 2020 season.
Wow.
So we were very surprised that was so few Americans.
So where were most of the people that you met? Where were they from? Mostly Europe?
Europe, yeah.
And a lot of Canadians,
A lot.
a lot of people from Japan, Korea, that Asian, a lot of them, and it amazed us because, of course, a lot of them were just dressed to the max, makeup on. I mean, they always had the, you know, the best little outfits on and everything else, and you're like, wow, you know, we're just trucking along, but they were very well dressed.
Sort of, you were talking about you had to get another flight, and then you filed under the compensation. What, can you tell us a little about that?
If you're flying in an airline, to an EU, European Union country, or flying from or between countries, the EU has got stipulations that require, I know it's 2.5 hour delayed flight, you're eligible for compensation, and for a canceled flight, you're eligible for compensation. They laid the amounts out, and I think that, we have the option, it was United, right? Yeah. United flight is canceled. So we reached out to them, but actually, Sister Kathy reached out. They basically blew her off, and they really took forever to respond and whatever. So then we submitted this, and what you have to do is, there's a form you download, you fill it out, you send it to the airline. And then they're to respond to you in so many days, and if they don't, then you contact the EU office, and they'll go after you. Well, we sent it, And they responded and says, we'll be processing, so they offered cash, they offered me $600 cash, which covered the flight, or $1,000 in credit, like.
Mhm.
And
Plus
then
they
we had
pay
to-
for our hotels.
all that, yeah.
Because we were overnight, they pay for our hotels, our eatery, our transportation,
So-
everything related that we did that day, they paid for that entire
So-
stuff. You have to submit, of course, all the receipts, but basically.
But if
they-
you even talk to them on a phone and you say that you want, some compensation, they'll give you the runaround. But if you say that, well, then I'm gonna file, paperwork under the EU 261. So, oh, okay, well, we'll take
Like
it,
that.
that will process it. That's sort of the hammer, the threat.
Fascinating. Is that, contract with the Netherlands.
As they say, any airline flying to
And the
or coming
interesting
from
thing is, if you look at a United site to actually get reimbursement for cancellations and all that, it is buried so deep in there that you'll never find it. It is just link after link after link after link, but boy, you put on a comment and you write in EU 261 there. The fines are so heavy for them not to do it.
How did you find out about EU 261?
We're it kind of like, we had word of mouth, somebody had told us and we knew that there was something with